Oh boy, do we all have a fantastic show for you today. Welcome to Continuing Conversations, where we talk about everything Star Trek Adventures and Captain's Log and anything around narrative and storytelling. My name is Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, lead writer on Captain's Log, and also I'm one of the contributors on Continuing Missions, which is the #1 blog for Star Trek Adventures RPG. And this would not be a show unless I had, let's see who's sharp out there and catches this, unless I had the never feeble, always good, resplendently excellent, remarkably incredible, amazing, monstrously unearthly creative Jim Johnson with me.
Never feeble. You're hearkening back to the TSR phase rip, aren't you? Yes, you are. Well, this show is beyond. What is it? Beyond X? No, beyond. Is it beyond? Isn't it? Yeah. Shift X. Yeah. Hey,
oh yeah. Class 5000, man. Class 5000.
Class 5000. Yeah. Hey everybody, Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modiphius Entertainment, and the Captain's Log solo RPG, also published by Modiphius Entertainment. Lo, these many years. Co-host on this here show with Michael, going on 2 years strong now. 130 odd episodes, and we still got plenty of stuff to talk about. Not just Star Trek, but storytelling, all kinds of things that you can talk about with Star Trek, because it's a franchise that never seems to end. So there's always something new to talk about. And we have a very, very, very special guest with us tonight here. Man who has just a credits list longer than my arm, and I've got big long arms, big honking arms. So
and even more children to match.
So without more ado, I'm going to have him introduce himself. But Matt Forbeck, please tell us all about yourself, sir.
Hey, Michael and Jim, thanks for having me on. My name is Matt Forbeck. I've been working on tabletop games and other things since the late 80s. So I've been at it for a while. In fact, I was just doing the math. This is going to be my 43rd Gen Con coming up, right?
Whoa.
Doing it for a long damn time. But I started doing tabletop role-playing games when I was in high school and college, and then started doing it professionally. Worked for Games Workshop, founded a company called Pinnacle Entertainment Group, which did Deadlands, Brave New World, down to Savage Worlds. Left that company after we started having kids and moved back to Wisconsin, where I've been freelancing for most of my life. Nowadays, I mostly do video games, comic books, novels, encyclopedias. And the current thing I'm spending most of my time on is the Marvel Multiverse Role-Playing Game for Marvel Comics, which is a role-playing game based on, only the most popular brand in the world, or so they tell me. So it's a good gig. I don't mind it.
Absolutely. All right. So as a tradition on our show, we like to ask our guests, since this is primarily Star Trek focused, but we'll be talking about a lot of stuff tonight. We always ask our guests, what is your favorite Star Trek series? And of all the many, many characters out there in the franchise, who's your favorite character?
Those are tough ones. Actually, I'm a big Star Trek geek. I've been watching it forever, right? I was a little too young to watch the original series when it came out on television, but since then I've been watching just about everything. And Next Generation really sang for me. That was a show that my wife and I watched even when we were in college, and just had a great time with it. God, there's so many great characters to choose from. I don't even know where to start.
You have to think of the first one that pops in your face.
The first one that popped in my head was Picard, right? Just because Picard's been this wonderful actor for so long, Patrick Stewart, and just does so many great things. But he's just got that great stage presence that a lot of the earlier stuff was this close in, really hammy type stuff. And he shows up with a Shakespearean actor and just knocks the hell out of it. And I think gave it a lot of gravitas that it was looking for in those days, right? There have been a lot of great actors since then. Fantastic people have come through it. It's just fun to watch them grow and develop. A lot of the Next Generation cast, so I don't know a ton of them, but I kind of work alongside them tangentially because like Will Wheaton was a friend of mine before he in his shallow years when he wasn't famous anymore, right? When he was just blogging, I would trade Blood Bowl books with him for his autobiographical books. And then guys like Jonathan Frakes and Jerry, who plays 709, whose last name is going to escape.
Jerry Ryan,
thank you. Yeah. They worked on Leverage, which John Rogers was a friend of mine who started out the TV show there. And when it started out, I was like, John, you should do novels based on that. And he's like, do you know any editors? Yes, I do. So I set him up with that. And a couple of years later, I got a call saying, do you want to write a leverage novel? So I got to do that too, which was nice.
Oh, sweet. Oh, that's so cool.
There are worse things, it's, I've had a lot of fun doing that and just seeing a lot of friends of friends working together and doing these amazing things. And it's such a great franchise and wonderful people there. I also had this theory that Jerry Ryan is actually the reason that President Obama was elected president, right?
I believe you.
Well, the reason is because her husband was a senator from Illinois, and then they got divorced in a very public split because he was not very kind to her, trying to drag her off to sex clubs in Paris and stuff like this, distasteful stuff. And so she had a public divorce with him. He resigned. And that opened the door for a young state senator from Illinois, from the Chicago area, to run for the U.S. Senate. And that was Barack Obama, right? So,
haven't I told you that Jerry Ryan is the most important character in person, Jim? Haven't I been talking about this for years?
It's true, though, isn't it? She's just amazing, right? She's an amazing lady, does incredible stuff, and she's such a great advocate for all sorts of wonderful things. And when the writer's strike and the actor strike was going on, she was on the line just about every goddamn day. So, so on a personal level, I think she's just amazing, right? The 7 and 9 is a great character too. Somebody who's had this abusive childhood that they suddenly grow up into and have to deal with, and all the trauma that comes from that. And it's almost like being deprogrammed from a cult, right? And
exactly.
Great stories there. So
Jim knows. First of all, I can't tell you how many shows we've talked about 7 of 9, because she is my favorite character, and I even wrote in Star Trek Explorer magazine. I was able to publish an article about that. Right. So you're just tickling me pink here, Matt, talking about all this. And I think I'll tell people the story too, because you made the point. The Star Trek or even the writing community is a small world. How this interview came about, for those of you who are watching, is we were actually brought together at D8 Summons by Connor Self, who had invited us both to run our games. So Matt was running the Marvel Multiverse Role-Playing Game, and I was running the Federation Klingon War, the latest release at that time from Star Trek Adventures. And we had a nice chance to talk over the charity dinner there. We were supporting the Dixon Council for Aging, because I'm big into affordable housing for seniors. So that touched my heart, which is why I wanted to go out there. Matt, of course, has a soft place in his heart for those charities too. And so we were talking, and then I was like, we've been talking, me and Jim, for a long time about talking about Marvel and Star Trek on the show. I said, well, this is my opportunity to ask Matt. And so I really appreciate you saying yes, Matt, and letting us today banter about our two favorite storytelling mediums. Tell us a little bit, Matt, about your history with Marvel. Why don't we start there with Marvel and RPG?
Sure. On a personal basis, it goes back to me like learning how to read on Spidey comics when I was a kid, right? Spidey comics were produced by the Electric Company in conjunction with Marvel Comics, which was the show that came on after Sesame Street, which has long since been canceled. But they had this guy who come on in this goofy hat. His name was Easy Reader, and he introduced Spider-Man on the show. He'd also do it in the comic books too. It's like, come on, Spider-Man, slip me some skin. It's like 70s black dude. And it turned out that was the voice of God, right? I'm blanking on the name though. Who's the voice of God in like
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman. It was Morgan Freeman who was the guy, right? And I'm like, he was. You can tell I'm kind of fried because I'm just dropping names left and right. I can't remember stuff that I should definitely remember. But
no, you're just so excited to be on our show. Don't worry, everyone gets
Morgan Freeman was
We're used to it.
I was like so excited to figure that out when I got older. I was like, wow, just such a great career from him too. But then I grew up reading comic books and collecting them. And then when I got into college, I started working on game design. When I got out of college, when I got back from Games Workshop, about mid-93, 94, a guy named John Nee called me up from Wildstorm, which was Jim Lee's division of Image Comics. And he said, hey, I got a recommendation from Marty Stever, who was over at Capital City Comics at the time, saying that you would be a great game designer to bring in to help us design this collectible card game that we're working on. And Marty had actually been a guy I had met at my first Gen Con playing Dawn Patrol when I was like 13, 14 years old. And then he was a couple years ahead of me at the University of Michigan. So we would hang out and play games and such. And then he went on to be a vice president at WizKids after that too. But he had recommended me for this gig. So I flew out there and I got to meet John and Jim Lee, who was, one of the best artists of all time. And Drew Bittner, who was the co-designer of the game. And John and Jim Jim and Drew had created this game, and they wanted to know if it was any good. And I'm like, no, not really, but we can fix that. And they're like, okay, great. So they hired me on to fix it, and we did several releases for that game. And then over the time since then, I did a bunch of different Marvel things over the years. I wrote 2 editions of the Marvel Encyclopedia. I wrote an Avengers Encyclopedia. I wrote Captain America book for DK Publishing. I wrote bits for the official Marvel handbook. I wrote dialogue for a couple different Marvel MMOs. I designed a game called Marvel Heroes Battle Dice that was from Playmates Toys that went into Walmart and Toys R Us and Target and all the other big chains, and had TV commercials, which was just wild. And I kept in touch with John. So John became a VP at DC Comics when Wildstorm was sold to DC, and then later left them to become the publisher at Marvel Comics. And when he was a publisher, he also was one of the owners and founders of Cryptozoic, which is a game publishing company. And so he's a big believer in games and has really gotten into role-playing games. He's like, I think Marvel needs to do a role-playing game. It's been a long time. And Matt, you're my choice. So come on over and do this. I'm like, because as much as I love playing role-playing games, I had still been writing role-playing games. I was pretty much out of doing hardcore role-playing game design because honestly, it doesn't pay well enough to feed a family of 7 and put 4 or 5 of them through college. So I was like, well, because I was doing video games and other things. And but when the publisher of Marvel Comics says, "Are you interested in doing a tabletop role-playing game for it?" I'm like, man, I don't know how I turn that down.
It looks so good on a resume. You can't.
Yeah, it's like, well, at this point, I don't give a shit about a resume. I'm in my 50s. The resume days are hopefully behind me. And also, I've been working for myself for most of my life. So. But it's just one of those things. It was 2 things I just absolutely adored. Tabletop role-playing games and Marvel Comics, and to put those in front of me and dangle them there and say, "What do you think?" I'm like, "Oh, you me with both hands."
Yeah.
And could not refuse, and I think John knew that right away. So
now, have you ever played a Star Trek RPG of any sort?
I have played Star Trek RPGs. In fact, I was friends with the guys at Last Unicorn when they were developing way back in the day, and then they became the game design division at Decipher after that. And they used the same engine for the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, which was put out during the original movies, which I was a line developer for. I actually was the line developer for the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, and had done some Lord of the Rings stuff for Iron Crown Enterprises and a Middle-earth role-playing game before that.
Now, Jim, you have a connection too, right? Jim, don't you have a connection to both Lord of the Rings and Decipher Star Trek?
Decipher, because I came in as a playtest coordinator and then a freelance writer. But I think I was working with Jeff Tidball, who I think must have taken. I missed the history there, but I think he must have picked up right where you left off, I guess.
Yeah, Jeff's a great friend of mine. I'm pretty sure he came in after me. I took over from Steve Long, who was also like the biggest Tolkien geek in the world. But Steve had the opportunity to help purchase Champions, the role-playing game, right? And Steve is the biggest superhero geek in the world. Absolutely adored Champions too.
That was my very first game I ever played.
There you go, right? If you have a choice between this property you really love and the game you really love, and he's like, well, I'm going to have to give up on the Lord of the Rings so I can go run Champions instead. And he had a ball doing that for years and years and years. I don't blame him for making that choice in 1 second. So, and I ended up, the reason I ended up leaving that is because after my wife had the quadruplets, which is when this was all happening, we have quadruplets plus an older one who's now 25. The quads are 21. But I ended up taking a job with a company, right? Which the only time I've ever worked for anybody besides myself since pretty much since I got out of college. I worked for Games Workshop on a student work visa for 6 months after I got out of college. And I worked for Human Head Studios for 18 months as the director of their game design division, Adventure Games, which was tabletop games. And that was the only time I've ever worked for anybody else. And that was only solely for the health insurance benefits, right? My wife was like, well, I'm not going to be working for a little bit here. And I tell you, the moment she started itching to go back to work, I'm like, well, there's this thing called Cobra. It's about 18 months. And I figured out that she was a school social worker. So it's going to be about 16 months. You're not going to go back this year, go back next year. We could Cobra for 16 months. So I immediately quit the job and ended up going back to writing novels and video games. And
so everyone, you heard his advice. You need to find a partner who's a social worker and have quadruplets plus one, and then you'll be able to be a writer for your whole career.
The big thing, honestly, is a spouse with benefits, right? Yeah, when we were starting out, it was just the two of us. I could buy the health insurance myself. In fact, I had health insurance through Gamma, the game manufacturers of America. I think I was one of like 10 people who were on the plan. It was a very small plan.
Wow.
But then she got a job and had health insurance benefits. So we just relied on that. And then when you have kids, you can't say, "Sure, I'll just wing it," right? Especially quadruplets who are all premature. So it was required to have some kind of health insurance, and for that, I was willing to work. And this is before the healthcare exchange and everything. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go do it. And as soon as I could get off that hook, I jumped. So back at it.
The industry's good to have you. So what we want to do too is, I think for both myself and Jim, Star Trek and Marvel are our loves. I mean, right after Champions, I went to Heroes Unlimited for a little bit and then played Marvel Superheroes RPG for literally 30 years with one group too. Basically, we played and we, went all the way from around the table, me being 15 years old, all the way to us being in different parts of the world, playing over email, and then finally over, moving over to Discord eventually. But we want to talk about the storytelling difference. We're celebrating, your release. Jim and I talk all the time about the different way you tell a story in Star Trek compared to Marvel. And maybe, Jim, why don't we you played both games, right, Jim? You're a fervent MSR.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What were some things you wanted to frame? Maybe start with the conversation about the difference between Marvel and Star Trek.
Well, yeah, I mean, difference. I'm curious about differences, certainly, but I think I'm really excited about the similarities too. And in fact, I was just literally reading. I mean, this is perfect timing, Michael. I don't know how you managed to make these connections the way you do. I love it. But I was reading, and I don't have the author in front of me, and forgive me, I should have looked it up. But there's a book that just recently came out called All of the Marvels, and this writer read as much of the Marvel canon as he possibly could, and thousands and thousands of comic books, and then talked about it, right, in terms of the storytelling and how cohesive the universe is, right? Like you can drop into it literally anywhere you want and pick it up and go. And his encouragement was, don't try to read it from the beginning, because it was never written to be told from the beginning, right? And as I was reading this book, it reminded me of Star Trek, because now Star Trek is a 60-year-old franchise, 11 series, 13 movies, whatever, thousands of, over 1,000 hours of televised Star Trek, right? And you're not expected to watch it from the beginning all the way through. You just drop in, find the series that you like, find the thing that you like, and then grow from there. So I guess, before we talk about the differences, I'd like to hear a little bit, Matt, what are your thoughts on the similarities between these two gigantic franchises?
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think that the fact that it's been going on for so long, to say, hey, why don't you go back to 1939 and start reading with Marvel Comics #1 with the Human Torch shows up, and go forward from there, and having to torture yourself through the 50s and such when there's this long drought. No, you would give up immediately, right? For one, storytelling techniques have advanced quite a bit over the years. So while a lot of those things seem charming in retrospect, looking back at them, if you had to say, let's start with those, you would give up long before you got there. And I think it's kind of the same way now. You can, start up with Discovery or whatever and just go at it, as opposed to starting with the original series, which, as wonderful as it is, as beloved as it is, can seem dated by modern standards, right? And deservedly so. So I think one of the other big things about it for a lot of the Marvel books and Star Trek is it tends to be an ensemble cast, especially if you're talking about team books, right? If you're talking about like the X-Men or the Avengers or whatever, you end up having A plots, B plots, C plots that all weave together as you're trying to pick up the different threads, especially in modern Star Trek, where, the stories can actually go over a season as opposed to, just one and done every week, right? So you can have those stories, but there's this ongoing thread that carries you through from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. And I think that Marvel has always been able to do that too. There's a lot of those soap opera threads that you get that are set up here and then don't pay off for a year or two later in an issue. And that doesn't mean you can't tell wonderful stories in the meantime. But the fans are all going, but what happened then? What was that bit you dropped there? When are we going to learn the secret about that? And just like with Marvel and Star Trek, sometimes a thread gets dropped, and years later somebody picks it up, in a book or whatever. It says, "Hey, you remember that part that we never explained to you? Let me explain it to you." It's even better now because we have more things to do, right? And neither one of them is afraid of retconning things when they need to, right? If they'll say, "What this really meant was this," right? In fact, Stan Lee used to give out prizes. They called them no prizes for people who come up with solutions for errors they found in the comics. Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, Stan, but it makes sense if this was actually the reason behind it. He's like, hey, true believer, you get a no prize. And they'd actually send you like a blank, an envelope that was empty, right? So you could show it.
Did you ever win one?
No, I was too young for a lot of that stuff, right? So, and I was not one of the kids who wrote in letters a lot to Marvel. I was mostly there just to read and then interact too much. And so I started going to comic book conventions when I was at college, right? And mostly that was because I was doing gaming conventions. And I would get dragged to comic book conventions where they were trying to sell those too.
Yeah. What about the similarity of themes too between? Would you say if there's a similarity of themes between Star Trek and Marvel, what would you call that out as?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's they're both generally hopeful, right? They both generally think that people are decent human beings and there are heroes amongst us that are ready to stand up and help when needed. And I think that's something that's important for people to hear sometimes, right? They're not dark and saying, "Oh, geez, everything's screwed and you're screwed and why fight anymore or why do this." There's sometimes you get some cynicism in them, but that's usually just a reflection of the greater long-standing story, which is that if you want to make a difference in the world and you want to save people, you want to save people around you, you have to stand up and take action, right? And I think both of the series work on that pretty strongly.
I think I'd add that Marvel and Star Trek both have an incredibly huge, diverse cast of characters, right? I think, even just like looking behind you, Michael, right? You got the mutants and superheroes. I mean, there's just so many different characters. And one of the things I've always loved about Marvel is they can either intentionally or unintentionally, they can let a character rest for a number of years or a decade or something, and then a new creative team will come in and you'll get a whole new #1 issue and a whole new mini series or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, you just get this fresh take on it. And I would love to see Star Trek get to that point. Like, I mean, certainly they do it with the novels and the comic books that are out there, but I would love to see more ways to bring more of these characters back and do like a limited run series of like, let's do a mini series on Nog, right? Let's do a mini series on Rom. Let's do a mini series on Lita. Like, taking all these little individual characters out and tell their stories, either in whatever medium. I guess comic books are pretty effective. Novels too, certainly. But I think that's one of the things I've always appreciated about Marvel is that they are incredibly diverse in the characters that they present, and then just all the possible storytelling possibilities. Like when you take two completely different characters and you combine them into a new story, like why not, right? Like pitch a Kingpin and Storm story, why not? And just see what happens. Spin it off for a couple of issues and just see what happens.
Exactly. I think it's generally progressive too. I think the funny part is when you see some guys step up now and they're like, when did they start making Star Trek or Marvel progressive? You're like, man, I don't know what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Come on. I mean, it was Captain America's first appearance as punching a fascist out on the cover of his first issue, right? Punching Hitler out, right? I don't know how you don't see that as progressive for the day, right? And to go back and say, oh, they didn't have politics involved. I'm like, no, you guys weren't paying attention. Maybe it's because you were 6 at the time.
They weren't reading the subtext about Iron Man's fight against the military-industrial complex.
Right, exactly. So it's always kind of shocking to me when people are like, oh, this stuff is about. I can't believe they put this in there. I'm like, it's always been in there. You just weren't paying attention at the time. So
yeah,
it's great to see that keep going forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the thing that also to talk about is, of course, there's the Deadpool comics, or there are the shoot first Punishers, which also were reflective of the days that they were being, post Vietnam War, PTSD, all that conversation, kind of that. But then overall, like mine, I was always Avengers, Fantastic Four kind of person, and the Fantastic Four to me was the Star Trek of the Marvel universe because they kind of followed the same ingredients as Star Trek. They'd go for the diplomatic, the scientific, okay, now it's clobbering time kind of solution. And that's very Star Trek. I think that's the way I like to, play my games in comparison.
Yeah, Ryan North's new Fantastic Four series very much follows that too. It's like a lot of great science fiction stories. Some of them are just one and done in the issue, high concept stuff. It's really a great callback. He's doing a great job.
Oh, and when you matched it with the art of like Alan Davis, it was just like game over. I mean, that was to me was just like the epic Fantastic Four, time there. Just beautiful, very clean lines. Now, the difference. Are you done with the similarities, Jim?
No, by all means. I mean, we could go on, but let's diversify a little bit.
I noticed, and I kind of want to hear your experiences because I think we're all around the same age group, and so we probably came up around the same time of Marvel comics. I probably got into the Marvel superheroes RPG riding off the back and excitement of things like Secret Wars and Chris Claremont's X-Men. So you're seeing amazing characters in amazing gloried battle against cosmic forces, and so starting out it was fight, the itchy and scratchy show for sure. But then as I grew up, I noticed that the Marvel stories grew up with us, and we started using reason, intuition, and psyche way more than fighting, agility, phaser, rip, strength, endurance. We matured. Our characters actually matured. It actually became a little pathos and sad. As the world's crumbling around us and family and friends are going the way. Star Trek Adventures was different because it left me with a happy ending every single time, like we're playing these episodic things. So that's where Marvel kind of was different, is it was really fight. I don't know if that is how your games ran. Let me know how your games ran compared to how your Star Trek games run.
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, I think that Marvel tends to go to the punch people out far before Star Trek does, right? I mean, every now and then you would get Jim Kirk in there and have to do the fisticuffs and whatever, but it was always kind of it's never like the widescreen Hulk bashing Thor kind of stuff. So, which is fine. I mean, it's a different flavor, right? I think that's perfectly fine. And you get some of that, particularly in the cosmic flavored stuff that Marvel does, right? A little bit more of that. If you get into the Guardians of the Galaxy, or if you get into some of the more of the Captain Marvel stuff, right? It's a little bit more cerebral like that. But the standard thing is, hey, Hulk smash, right? You have to have the Hulk smash. But that's okay. I think it's good to have both different types, and I think they kind of complement each other that way, which is one of the reasons that like the whole X-Men Star Trek thing you have behind you works so well, right?
Definitely. Jim, how did you play your game? What was the comparison between your two?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Phase Rip, the TSR Marvel superheroes, that was like early to mid 80s, right?
84.
Yeah, it was like 82. Yeah, it started 82,
83, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So we played the basic box, and then the advanced box came out, and that was like amazing when that advanced box with the shiny logo on it. And I remember some of our earliest games were very much fighty, shooty, punchy, and that kind of stuff. But I think right about the time the Next Generation came out, and like you were talking, Matt, you were talking about Patrick Stewart having just this commanding presence, right? Very grounded, and settled that show into much more of a cerebral kind of thing. Like my group kind of transitioned from Marvel into a homebrew Star Trek game, but even we were still playing Marvel, but we discovered that our Marvel games were getting more cerebral too. And I think part of it was that we were starting to explore more mature themes. Like one of the characters in our Marvel group was dating Rogue, because of course, as you do, right?
Yeah.
But because of Rogue's particular nature, there were some very dramatic things, like there's a lot of yearning in those episodes when we played with them, because it was like, we're dating, but we can't physically interact, right? And it's like there's a whole lot of pathos kind of got pulled into that, and it was just, I mean, it was fascinating as a role player just to sit there and watch him try to work through this. And of course, we were watching Next Gen a lot, right? So we were playing Next Gen, we were playing Star Trek, and more of those, and we all matured. I mean, we were all like 15, 16, 17, right? And we were all maturing as Marvel was continuing to mature, and as Next Gen came out and showed us new possibilities for our storytelling, and we started moving away from the fighty stuff into the more dramatic storytelling and other things. So yeah, it's interesting that that it worked out that way, thanks to Marvel and Star Trek. Weirdly enough.
Yeah, and I like to say that too, because many people they may automatically assume RPG means fighty, because they may have grown up with the most popular RPG ever, that is fighty, right? And so one of the things we talk about, Matt, and want to kind of hear your take on it too. We talk a lot about RPG is so much more than just rolling dice and hack 'em, slash 'em, gathering hit points, going for loot, and we really focus on the rewards of narrative storytelling, almost like improvisation, or as Jim refers to it many times, as theater of the mind. Where has do you still actively play RPG, and what do you seek when you do if you do join into RPG
I don't
games?
have an ongoing campaign that I play, and mostly because I spend most of my well, there's a couple different reasons. One is that I'm usually play testing stuff when I play, right? So it doesn't really lend itself really well to an ongoing campaign. The other is that especially if you're running stuff like that, it's a way to scratch your creative itch. And after I've spent my entire day scratching that itch, I don't really feel the need to go out and play more games, right? I usually will, like read books, see movies, play video games, play board games with my kids, things like that. But generally don't turn to tabletop role-playing games in that moment. Although I do a lot of them at conventions and such, right? But for me, that's like, okay, great, I'm here. It's one shot. I can be really invested in this one thing, and I can go home. I don't have to worry the ongoing stuff and everything else. So, but yeah, I think that for me, one of the big moments I remember maturing was like when I started playing a game called Boot Hill when it came out, right, way back in the day. And it was a Western game, which is probably how we ended up getting into Deadlands and such. But the difference was that every time somebody pointed a gun at you in Boot Hill, you had like a 33% chance of dying, right? And you're like, well, this is not a fighty game. This has now become a talkie game, right? Because or a sneaky game, or we have to come up with other solutions because the deadliness meant that you couldn't screw around with the fighting. You were just, if you did that, you were going to be rolling up another character pretty quickly, right? Brilliant. I think that was a big moment for us as players, just to say, if death really is something that can knock you around, and I think that's one of the things about D&D and even Marvel, that is that death really seems really remote, right? It's not really permanent, even in Marvel. When it happens, you're like, he'll come back, whereas in Star Trek, a lot of the time, I mean, if you're a red shirt, for instance, it's really close. It could be, this time right now. So, a lot of the main characters seem to have plot armor, but even then, they have a lot of loss happening in their lives, and they're reluctant to go directly for shooting things and shooting people, as opposed to trying to talk it out, coming up with a better solution. I always admire that.
Yeah, I think that's where I know when we talk about RPG and trying to attract people into it, I've had people who came in, played the game the first time, and they were like, that was way more refreshing than I thought it was going to be. Like, because it did get them cerebrally going. And I think people need to know that. I mean, the way that, let's talk a little bit about the Marvel design game is, I've read through it. I missed playing with you in Dixie because I was running a game at the same time. Even though I signed up, they put me at the same time, so I couldn't even play. And
like the next table over, I'm like, there he is.
Right, but I was curious. If I played the Marvel superhero, the Marvel Multiverse RPG. Does it lend if I wanted to go cerebral like that? Could I do that?
I mean, it's a game that when we were looking for a market for this game, and I think that was one of the first things we had to sit down and do, is say, who are we going to sell this game to? We decided that instead of trying to reinvent role-playing games, we were going to try to see if we could get people who already play role-playing games to play this, right? So obviously the biggest market for that is D&D players who like to, kick down doors, stab things, take their loot. Now, you don't take the loot in the superhero game, but so you have different reasons for doing things, and that's actually emphasized throughout the game. And the other thing other people we want to bring in were people who are Marvel fans who were RPG curious, right? Like they would be like, that seems really intriguing, but man, pointy ears and wands, but capes and spandex, awesome. So, when we were doing that, we knew that was going to be a fighty game from that point of view, right? And that death was always going to be something that you weren't really serious about. But there's certainly lots of, it's less codified in the rules and more in the coaching in the narrator section about this is how you can run a game, this is how you want to do these kind of things. Also, as the game gets built out, as we're doing more and more expansions, we're building out different things for that. Like, for instance, the X-Men book is very much about teams and team building, right? Because it's, the X-Men are always about, here's your class in school, and then, X-Force spins off, and all the other different spin-offs happen. So we wanted to be very much about how team dynamics work, right? The Spider-Man book is going to be more about supporting cast. I'm working on a Spider-Verse book right now.
Smart.
So it's, again, we try to take each of these books and theme them in a way that fits with the property that we're working on. So it's a different book. So it's not just a splat book that says it's the same book you had here, but this time it's Spider-Man, this time it's X-Men. It gives you a whole different set of a different lens with which you can look through to see that world, right? That's the whole idea. So I'm a big fan of doing all these role-playing whatever way you want to. That's the other thing we try to emphasize in the game is that if you enjoy what you're doing at the table, you're doing it right. Now, we talk about safety tools. We talk about making sure everybody's having a good time. But as long as you are having a good time at your table with your friends and you're all having a good time, then fine, do whatever you want to. If it's all punchy, great. If you never throw a punch because you're just too busy having the romantic talks or whatever, go for it, right?
I love this. This is a new maturity. Jim, can you maybe talk a little bit, because this went heavy, sounds very similar to what with the 2E design, and we talk a little bit about it because maybe people are tuning in for the first time to the show because they saw Matt Forbeck, and so they're like, "Oh, I'm going to go listen to this podcast." So let's Forbeck, yeah, let's talk about the comparison to what your team put into the design for Star Trek Adventures Now second edition.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a trend that's been growing in the RPG industry for, I don't know, I guess the last 10, 15 years, maybe not quite that much, but certainly within the last 10 years, I've seen more big games and also a lot of indie games, especially the indie movement in RPGs has just blown up in the last several years. There's been much more focus that I've seen anyway on session zeros, running effective session zeros, getting everybody in the group on board, whether you're playing at a convention or you're playing with a group of friends, either online or virtually. Like, get everybody on the same page. If you're not on the same page, that's okay. Find a different game. Find the happy medium that's going to get everybody excited. And if you want to do the questionnaire, I've seen plenty of game groups do the questionnaire saying what's okay, what's not okay, lines, veils, that kind of stuff. I think you're seeing a lot more of that in RPGs now because it's really kind of expected at this point, especially with the younger generations coming into the game. They have a whole different perspective than those of us who are Gen X and even the elder millennials, right? It's just a different mindset. And we have to respect that, obviously, because we want to make sure that everybody is having a good time and that it's a safe space and that the game is encouraging you to create a safe space to go have these amazing adventures. And I think that's absolutely something that we were thinking about for second edition. I think we started touching on it in first edition, but that came out 8 years ago. And even 8 years ago, the industry was different than what I've seen it be now, right? Where it's even more progressive than it was, if you can believe that. And I think, I'm hearing you, Matt, and it's like, oh yeah, who's our audience for this game? Are we targeting like hardcore Star Trek fans? Are we targeting casual Star Trek fans? Are we targeting, who are we trying to aim this at, the second edition at? And so we did have a lot of conversations similar to what you're talking about. And, Star Trek, I think there's certainly opportunities for pew pew and violence and shooty and, but like in the last 8 years, like spending a lot of time on social media with the fan base, either casual fans or the hardcore gamers, they're like, I don't know, Michael, what would you say? Like 8 times out of 10, they'll start playing and like the game master will kind of want to give them an opportunity to get into a fight, but the group will just find a way to talk themselves out of it, right? They'll find the diplomatic path, they'll find the alternative path. And I think that's kind of cool, right? I mean, it certainly fits the Star Trek, genre and tropes and stuff, but like just in general, fans are wanting to find an alternative to fighting, and that's just cool to see. And that's something that we definitely played into the design of the system.
Well, I have to ask you both then. I'm going to ask you both when you thought about the designs of the system then. Matt, I know that Jim is talking about, a non-violent solution. And when I have to write a game, when I'm asked to do a mission module for Modiphius, I have to design the module in a way so that a non-violent solution is possible. I can't push them into action and fighting. Is the Marvel Multiverse game designed in the same way?
I'll tell you, we lean into comic books, which means somebody probably is going to punch somebody at some point, right? So, which is okay. I think it's fine. I mean, but it's violence in the sense that I'm going to punch you and knock you out, not murder everybody in the room, right? In fact, we have one of the rules of the game is that you can't unintentionally kill somebody. You can't accidentally kill somebody, right? Because it's very easy to, if you're like, Captain Marvel coming up and punching some guy in the street, to one-shot him into a blister on the wall, right? But we're saying, no, you're a hero. You would pull back at the last second and not do it. And we actually kind of stole that from the Spider-Man video games that are coming out these days from Activision, right? Where if you've ever been playing these games, sometimes Spidey will kick somebody off a tall building. You're like, oh my God, that guy is so dead, right? What the hell just happened? And then you have him swing around and like, nope, he's just webbed right there to the building because, off screen somehow Spider-Man shot the webs behind his back and that guy's not dead. Spider-Man would kill him, right?
Okay, then I have to ask you, are you eventually going to have a Bring on the Bad Guys supplement?
Well, we also say if you want to, you could do it, but you have to say, "I want to kill this person," right? Or however you want to do it. And I don't know if we're going to get to the bad guys. So eventually, we'll get to everything, right? Hopefully, as long as the game goes on for years and years. But Marvel, we tend to lean into the heroic. We tend to lean into good things for good people. Um, we haven't done any much with the Punisher yet. For instance, you brought the Punisher. Punisher's not a hero. The Punisher is an anti-hero at best, right?
Correct.
And actually started out as a villain. And just because they focused on him for comic books didn't make him a hero, right? And Marvel's obviously had a lot of angst over the years about how some factions in reality have taken that Punisher logo and kind of taken it as their own. You're like, wait a minute, guys, you guys
Dangerous stuff.
Basically saying I'm a villain. I'm not sure if that's a great thing, and they even have a new Punisher now. Actually, they just launched a new Punisher earlier this year, late last year. So it's been interesting to see all that stuff happen. So yeah, we do get into the punching. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But on the other hand, what I like to do when I'm designing an adventure is to set up a situation and say, okay, there are a lot of obvious solutions here. One of them, at least, is going to be knocking people down, bursting through walls, saving people, whatever. The other one might be a lot more diplomatic, might be a lot quieter, right?
Yeah.
So
I know. I know our group, as they got mature, they worried less about knocking out the other villain and trying to find out what's their plan and just frustrate that. They were trying to rip the meaning from the attack and whatever. And when we grew up to that level, probably in our late 18, 19, 20, the game really took off when they started talking and then saying, I'm not going to destroy the city. I'm just going to take away what you want and deal with that. So I thought that was a creative maturity.
No, it's great because it also makes it much more personal, right? And it's hard to design that into games. It's not impossible, but because you don't know who the players are, you don't know who the characters are, they're going to play the game, right? So you really are leaning on the game master for that kind of information. Yeah, we do a lot of coaching on that in the main rule book. Like, figure out who your players are, figure out who your characters are, what means something to them. There's a good section of the book called "The Spirit of the Game," where we're like, try to know what the game is about and what you're trying to lean toward before you start doing it. I often use an example when I was starting to play D&D with my kids, and they would say, okay, how do we build Molotov cocktails? Can we start inventing gunpowder? I'm like, well, technically, sure. But that's not Dungeons and Dragons at that point. It's another game. I actually made a game called Shotguns and Sorcery, which is all about doing that kind of stuff, right? But if you want to play D&D, you should try to play D&D, not some twisted version of what you think you're doing just to get advantages of it. And I try to coach people on, you want to play a game that feels like the comics, feels like the movies, and that you're not trying to just min-max all the time, right? And Monty Cook had an essay about this a couple of years ago that I remember. He says, I quit designing for assholes, right? For people who are just trying to destroy the game at every second.
I got to get that article.
People who are actually there to have fun with each other and play the game as opposed to trying to undermine each other constantly.
Yeah, though I have to admit, the a-hole who played in my game taught me how to be a great game master, and I was able to write a book about it later. Jim had me write a book, The Game Master's Guide, and I literally sat there and I sent it to my friend Nick. I'm calling you out. I sent it to my friend Nick, and I said I couldn't have written this book without you.
That's awesome. But you're right. I mean, that kind of adversity does help you build your skills, right? I mean, it's how you learn how to deal with troubled players, whatever you want to call them. But they're your friends too. I mean, you sit down across the table, and if somebody's acting up or doing something silly, they're doing that at the table. But outside of the game, they're still probably your friend.
Of course, right? Yeah.
So you got to make sure you come up with a way to deal with that, whether it's having a conversation with them or just say, you know what, you're right. You don't want to play this game. Let's play the game you want to play, or however the heck it's going to work. Right?
That's what we did. We just made him
all having fun.
Yeah, we made him start talking fourth. He broke the fourth wall before She-Hulk did. And then when She-Hulk came, I was like, hey, and then Deadpool did, hey. But my character had broke he was so insane. We said, okay, he knew he was playing in a game. That was his character. Right. He knew he was playing in an RPG game, and no one believed him. And it just made it so much. His character was just the insane one. It was just really fun.
Well, you guys will enjoy we have a Deadpool role plays the Marvel Universe, Marvel Multiverse, coming out July 16th, something like that. So it's a one-shot adventure that's got that Cullen Bunn, who was a Deadpool writer for a while, actually wrote the comic book that leads it off and the adventure. And I came in as a consultant. My son wrote the characters, but we're excited about that because it's coming out just in time for the movie. You're like, ooh. And it's honestly funny as can be. Cullen's a great writer. So.
Oh, brilliant! Perfect timing. So I'm curious. So in Star Trek Adventures, we really tried to emphasize that the game master and the players are in a collaborative relationship, right? And they're working together. And the game master is there to be a facilitator to help the players have an awesome experience. And what we've been trying to do is we've been really trying over the last 7 years. We've been trying to talk away from the idea, like some games, are out there where the it's kind of baked in that the game master is out to get the players or to get the player characters right, and there's that kind of like, oh, I'm going to keep throwing monsters at you until you're all total party kill and dead, right? So how did you balance that out with the Marvel game?
I think we leaned more in the direction you guys did, right? I mean, I think again, it's meant to be a collaborative storytelling exercise. Again, Marvel stories generally end up with the heroes winning, right? Whether or not you want to put them through hell first, but at the end they come out, right? And so we never want to have people feel like, oh yeah, it's just discouraging. We all got murdered. Let's roll up new superheroes, because again, that's not the fun thing. Now you could do that. And we actually talk about doing stuff as one shots, graphic novels, or ongoing series, and how the way you frame a story actually determines how the story is going to work, right? Because if you're doing a long-term story, it's a lot easier to go through the low points and come back out. But if you're doing a one-shot, you often don't have the time to torture the characters in between. So you have to focus on something that's a little bit easier to digest. But again, it's like when I'm running this game, I don't like to kill the players. I'm actually rooting for them the entire time, right? I want to make them squirm. I want to make them go, oh no, and surprise them and shock them. But I'm rooting for them the entire time, right? Which is very different from when we were doing Deadlands, which is when we would total party kill everybody just for fun. And at the end of it, you go, oh no, what happened? But it's a different genre. One's Western horror, which is what you're supposed to be doing that kind of stuff with. And the other one's superhero stuff, and the superheroes are supposed to survive at the end, or at the very least make a heroic sacrifice, right? And there's a good section of the book talking about that. If you're going to deal with death, generally speaking, from my point of view, I think it should be with the player's consent, right? It should be something where you actually buy into it and you don't just think, God, I just got cheated out of this by some stupid die roll. The game master was against me or whatever. It should be something you say, man, if I do this, this means everybody lives and it's a great story. Great. And lean into it, right? But it shouldn't be that old school D&D thing like the 2 and 4s where I'm just here trying to murder everybody, right?
Yeah.
Which can be fun, but it's just a different kind of game.
Yeah, that player should conspire with the game master to make it a meaningful death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That was the thing that always excited me most when I was game mastering either Marvel or Star Trek, is when the players were so invested in their characters. If there was a player, like I had a player who was enjoying playing his Star Trek character, but he was getting tired of it, right? And he wanted to switch and do something different. And so he approached me privately and he said, Jim, I want a really good death scene for my character.
That's
How can we
awesome.
make that happen? And do it respectfully and not just some random Tasha Yar thing getting killed by a slick of oil, right? And I was like, well, okay, let's make it happen. And then we built that storyline together in that scenario, and then we made it happen. Like the shock on all the other players' faces was totally worth it, because it paid off so well. And then I was able to say, well, he'll be back next week with a new character, and we'll move on from there. And it was such a great experience to be able to help the player achieve something that they really wanted, right? And when you get player investment like that, man, that's gold right there, right?
You can't purchase that. You can't do that any other kind of entertainment too. I think that's really the great thing about tabletop role-playing games, right? Is that you get that kind of buy-in and the players are working with you as opposed to against you. And you can have these experiences that are just alien to any other kind of art form, right? It's fun.
And that's what I'm hearing from you is, know the genre, let people know the genre that you're kind of playing in. And then everyone invests in telling the story together. That's really the way, it can work. I only have one more question for you, Matt. Jim, do you have any more questions for Jim? I think you do. There was something you want to talk about.
I do have one question, but Michael, go ahead. And then I want to pivot, but okay. I don't obviously I want to be very respectful for both your respective times. So go ahead.
Sure.
Okay. Here's my one fun question. Suppose you wanted, like what's on the cover behind me, to play a game where X-Men or Marvel characters meet your Star Trek group. If we want to do some sort of hybrid universe, which game system should you use, and how would you convert character? I have to ask. I know there's no answer. I didn't give you any time to prepare, but I'm going to both ask Jim and Matt. Matt, you go first.
Series, which I read way back in the day when it came out, I would use the Star Trek rules. Right?
Really?
They end up going mostly to the Star Trek universe, and it's really about how they're solving things with those guys. And I think that it was a good change of pace from the Marvel fans in that sense, right? Now, my tendency is to just use my own rules, of course, any chance I get a chance to do it. So I would probably first try to crack and see, could I get the Star Trek folks to work really well in this, in the Marvel system? I think he can. I think it's, but one of the things we did with the Marvel game is we did not make it a generic system, right? We made it something you could turn into a generic system if you wanted to. But every chance we had to, we leaned Marvel on it hard because that's our selling point, right? You're not buying this so you can just play a game with anybody you want to or play whatever you want to. You're buying this to play Marvel stuff. That's right there on the top of the cover. So, I mean, the characteristics spell out Marvel, it's might, agility, blah, blah, blah. The dice system is the D616 system, which is the Marvel Earth and Marvel Comics. So, I mean, we lean into that. We try to make sure that every time we do powers, they're flavored to the characters that have them, all that kind of stuff. So it would be more of a challenge, I think, to bring it over to the Marvel system. That doesn't mean it couldn't be done. I just probably have to come up with a few subsystems to actually make everything work.
Interesting. Jim, how would you do it? Well, Jim, you haven't seen the Marvel system yet. Have you seen 616?
I've looked at it a little bit. I haven't had a chance to play it yet. I'd have to get it to the table to really get down into the weeds and see how it all works. But I mean, my first impulse would be to start off with Star Trek, get everybody onto the holodeck or into an alternate universe, and then spin into characters in the Marvel game, right?
Yeah, that would be neat.
Have a different approach and almost do like what they did on Strange New Worlds, right? Where you've got the lower decks characters coming into Strange New Worlds, right? In the real life. So it's like you got these 4-color superheroes. All of a sudden they're in the Star Trek universe. Things are different, but they're still their characters, right? Or I go the other way. I go from the Star Trek universe into Marvel, and all of a sudden the live action characters are now animated or in comic book form or something, right? So I would try to find a way to creatively use both systems if I could make it work.
That'd be pretty cool.
I would love to know
something like that right now with the Spider-Verse book, because I'm writing up rules for Spider-Ham.
Oh, nice.
Yes,
and
of course,
the Marvel universe, and how things work differently. You can get hit by a hammer and walk away.
Oh, my nephew said I remind him of Spider-Punk. I don't know why, but that was the biggest compliment. I was like, yeah, it's so cool. So man, awesome. I can't wait to see Spider-Punk.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, there's a new Spider-Punk series right now, so it's great stuff. So.
Cool. All right, Jim, what was your pivot?
Well, so I highlighted this at the very top. I think even before we started recording, not to pivot away from Star Trek and Marvel completely, because of course these are in your DNA. Sure. For your incredibly long career as a writer, freelancer. You've mentioned several times that you've worked for yourself for a very long time now. And so, I know we're both in the IAMTW. That's where I remember seeing a lot of your emails pop up on the email list. So like you are, I think I would not be stretching it to say that you are one of few people in the RPG industry who have made a very long career out of it, right? Like it's hard to make a living at this, just RPG writing, and you found a way to branch out into fiction and video games.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've been doing it solely that way, but go ahead.
Yeah. Fair enough. But I guess like for those folks watching who are either freelancers or want to be freelancers or just getting started, building up their credits and getting more work. Like if you had one piece of advice for somebody going the route that you've gone, what would it be?
Oh man, there's a lot of advice to give. I mean, I joke that of course having a spouse with benefits is the most important thing, right? But I also think that if you're going to try to create art and you want to be able to be in control of what you're doing, that cutting your expenses and learning to live cheaply someplace is a great way to do it, because it's not that luck plays a huge part in everybody's success, right? And I think looking back at my career, I could say that luck came in several times, and I'm like, oh wow, that's amazing. The trick is that the more resources you have behind you, the luckier you can tend to get, because you get more chances at bat. You get more chances to roll the dice, right? So if you're, for instance, some wealthy person who doesn't have to work for a living, you get all the chances you want because you can just make all the art, right? I wasn't in that situation. I'd worked for a living pretty early on. So, but the thing I did is I moved to Wisconsin as opposed to New York City, where I grew up, and I was able to live really cheaply here, which meant that, I didn't have to worry about, freelancer income goes like this, right? You get big chunks and you get nothing. You get big chunks, you get nothing. And you have to weather those nothing months with the savings you have from your other months. And to be able to cut your expenses to a point where you can feel pretty comfortable, even in those lean months, I think really, really, really helps you. The other thing I would say to do is diversify what you're doing. If you just have this one thing you want to do, like, I am going to be the greatest Star Trek writer of role-playing games of all time, that's great. But there's probably already wonderful people doing that kind of stuff. And they may not have space for you at that moment, right? So you can keep doing that stuff, but go off and look at other games, come up with your own stuff. Don't even just look at games, look at fiction, comic books, video games, any other kind of storytelling. I often joke that I will write your laundry list for you. I will write your grocery list for the right amount of money. I don't care, right? And part of it is because I do it for money. I don't do it just for the art. I mean, obviously it's art and I care about that part, because if not, I would be, in high finance or something like that, or become an attorney or whatever. It's, this is what's important to me. But, if you go into art, obviously money is not the most important thing. You have to be able to balance that, your artistic desires with your ability to make a living. And for me, like, I worked in toy design and comic books and novels and encyclopedias and all sorts of other types of writing. And if one of those dried up or a company folded or whatever, that meant I had something else I could fall back on without having to go say, geez, I guess I have to go back to driving pizza like I did in college, or work at Walmart or wherever the hell else. There's nothing wrong with working anywhere. Every job that you're doing, you do a good job at, you have pride in it because you're feeding yourself and taking care of yourself. But obviously, if you prefer to be doing these artistic things, you want to be able to continue doing that. So you need to make sure you can diversify and not fall back in those fallback positions if you have to.
I love that. Do you feel it's easier now because of the internet to get more diverse jobs than before?
I think it's easier to make contacts with people than it was before. It used to be you had to go to conventions and you had to know people and talk to people. And that still helps, right? Like, for instance, you and I met at D8, but, we've probably seen each other online a few times before that. But that was when we're like, oh, we're at a meal. We can talk. We can cement this relationship and talk to each other. Whereas, in the old days, that's the only way you had. You had to go and work at a booth and talk to people and run demos and all this kind of stuff. Now you can just build up an audience for yourself online just by being part of a community or building one of your own. And you can do a lot more research. You can actually just reach out to people like, how do you write a limited series comic book, or whatever? And you can research that stuff. People are doing podcasts and, YouTube series and all that kind of stuff over. Some of them are free. Some of them cost you money. Generally, I say use the free ones and remember that every bit of advice that somebody is giving you, if they tell you it's the only way to do something, they're trying to sell you something. When any kind of writing you need to do, you should just pick and choose what works for you because it's actually different for everybody, right? I know writers who are very successful that write incredibly differently than I do. And ones that write identically to me who are, you just don't know. You just have to be able to pick out what works for you and your own crazy brain that happens to be doing these creative things. Creativity is a hard thing to map. That's why I'm not terribly afraid of AIs, to be honest with
you. Thank you. I see that we had a great show about it, actually.
There you go.
All right. Fantastic. So this is great. I love it. I'm going to, challenge our audience to, of course, Continuing Missions is a blog where people can send all their they can send all their creativity to, they can send their stories to. So I can't wait to see the person who gives me my first Marvel Star Trek amalgam story using one of these or a combination of the systems. I just want to see it. And so I look forward to that. Matt, thank you for coming on the show. One of the things we do to wrap it up is actually gratitude. We always want to be gracious and appreciative for everything that we have in life. So I'll start it off and then I'll pass it over to you, Matt, and then we let Jim close it. I'm going to go ahead and take it all the way back. You were right, Matt, about the date. 1984 first edition, 1986 advanced game, over to Jeff Grubb, who was the lead designer on the Marvel Superheroes RPG, which made me fall in love with this genre and really did a lot creatively. It was my improv class for 30 years. And of course, the cover was done by John Romita Jr., who is one of my favorite artists. So that's what also made the game was this simple but impactful art. So that's who my gratitude goes to. Thank you for making me an addict of RPG. Matt, how about you?
Well, in that case, I'll spin off Jeff, who's an old buddy of mine, to another old buddy of mine, Steve Winter, who was the co-creator of the original Marvel game. I think Jeff did more of the game design, Steve did more of the writing, but they both designed together. Steve ran the first ever convention game I ever played in, which was a Boot Hill game at the Winter Fantasy back in 1982, maybe.
Wow.
I've known him ever since. He's been an editor on some novels I wrote for Wizards of the Coast and or TSR back before that. And just wonderful, wonderful human being. And I'm just a treasure him as a friend. Yeah, but just to know that I was able to, it's one of those wild things. You get to look back and say, oh, I get to play games and be a friend with the guy who made these cool things I did that I just admired like crazy when I was a kid. And it's kind of surreal sometimes, you know?
That's how I feel about Jim.
Yeah, there you go. So Jim, over to you then.
Don't even get me started, Michael. I need to. I want to give my gratitude to all the creatives, right? Everybody who's created something. I mean, not just Star Trek and Marvel, but just like in general, you've created something, a book, a story, a comic, whatever, and you shared it with the world. You found a way to share it with the world, whether you're working for a company or you're self-publishing, whatever. All those stories that I've read over the years have inspired me, and they get glommed in here somewhere, and sometimes they come out as something new and different, or they're just there as mulch, right, for the story, for the storytelling, right? And so, like, yeah, everybody who's ever been involved with Star Trek, creating Star Trek, everybody involved in creating Marvel, and then also RPGs, like all the different RPGs that have come out over the decades that I've played and enjoyed, all the people I've played with, just that whole creative, that universal creative cloud that's out there that we all draw on from time to time. Just grateful to all of those folks. And then also grateful for the fans, right? All the fans out there that play the game, encourage each other, especially the ones that are helping each other learn the games and play the games. The folks that are at conventions, running games for other people and just trying to be your favorite champion and helping you be awesome. I'm so jealous that the two of you were able to go to D8 and run games for folks. So hopefully I'll get there next year. We'll see what happens, but just grateful for everybody who supports the hobby and tries to carry it on to the next group of players.
Excellent. Well said.
All right. Well, again, what a pleasure. I hope everyone had as much fun as we did talking about our two favorite IPs. Well, at least for me and Jim. I don't know does it qualify as one of your two favorite IPs?
It's in the top 5, but I'm a huge fan of a lot of stuff, right?
Okay. Well, now I'm curious. What's your second one? There's Marvel.
Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
A lot of different things, man. I am an omnivore.
Fantastic. That's the best way. Creative people are. I mean, we go from everything. I'm into Jane Austen, just to fire up my drama juices. So, all right. So until next time, everyone, IDIC. Thanks again, Matt.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. Thank you, Matt, for being here. Really appreciate you. We'll talk to you all next time.